Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's session. My name is Askia, and I am one of the event planners for the Redmond Reactor Space. Before we get started today, I've got a few things we'd like to go over. So if you could take a moment and just have a look at our code of conduct, which we've also posted in the chat. Basically, what that says is that we seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and please try to stay on topic. We'll share useful links throughout the chat, so keep an eye out for that. And we want you to know that this session will be recorded and is going to be available on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel for on-demand viewing, and that should be available in 24 to 48 hours. And that brings us to today's session. It's scheduled to run approximately 1 hour, and there'll definitely be time for questions. So with that said, I will now hand it over to AJ, our speaker.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're joining me from. My name is AJ Ansari, and I am delighted to be here with you to present a session that I had originally done at Microsoft Ignite 2024. The topic of the session is building smarter copilots, or you could call them agents now. And I still liked it because of the play in words, and it's 5 BetterBot best practices in Copilot Studio. So let's get started. If you can see my screen, we will proceed. And just a little bit in the way of introduction, I've shared my name with you, but my background, I am with DSWI. We're a Microsoft partner specializing in Dynamics 365 Business Central and Copilot Studio, and Power Automate. I've also been fortunate to be a Microsoft MVP since 2018, so that's about 7 years in the trot. And I'm a huge evangelist for the community. I love sharing my knowledge with folks, and so you'll find all kinds of great content. At DSWI, I'm the Chief Operating Officer and one of the partners here. And a couple of fun facts about me. Apparently, I can't do my animations right because fun facts appeared before the rest of them did. And so I run a news site called onlycopilotfans.com. It's I would call it maybe a news site or a news blog where you'll find a lot of helpful tips, tricks, and information, as well as changes to licensing and new information about Copilot from M365 and Copilot Studio. I'm also a huge Formula One fan. So if you would like to engage with that, with me on that, you can absolutely do so as well. You can find me on LinkedIn. That QR code that you're seeing on the right side of the screen, that will take you straight to my LinkedIn, or there's also a short link, bit.ly/AJ Ansari.com there, bit.ly/AJ Ansari. If you are ever in need for help with Dynamics 365 Business Central or with Copilot Studio, you're always welcome to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn again, and there's a link to schedule a call or meeting as well over there. So with that, let's get started with the presentation. If you have questions, feel free to put them in chat, but I will probably get to them at the end of the session. That way we don't disrupt the flow. I want to make sure that I do get my thoughts across, but I will make sure that if we don't get a chance to answer everybody's questions on the call today, we'll come back to them on LinkedIn. So feel free to engage over there as well. Or if you think about a question long after the session's due, we will do that. So without further ado, let's get started with the first of our 5 best practices. Now, the first best practice I always recommend to people is when a user comes to your agent or to your Copilot, they don't always know all the things that it can do for them. Now, they may have some contextual idea. If you've built an agent that's a customer service agent, or you've built an agent that's been put out there to answer questions about human resources, your team certainly may have some ideas about what those would look like, but it would be a good help to them to know the types of questions it can answer. For anyone who's used Microsoft 365 Copilot, you may already be experienced with that starter prompt concept that's out there. So I'm going to just drag a kind of a standard experience Copilot here. So if you're in Copilot for M365, you see these boxes. These are what are called starter prompts, and this is a standard feature and function within the Copilot experience. However, what you will realize is that if you are building an agent that is not a declarative agent, and what does that mean for anybody who's uninitiated? A declarative agent is an agent that is deployed inside of Copilot for M365. It's an agent that's going to be used in there. So again, I'm going to bring back a window, and I'll give you an example over here. In this particular example, I built an agent called Trade Law Copilot, and that's deployed in the work experience for Copilot for M365. If you were to build one there, you could certainly have some starter prompts, and that's a standard feature and function. And building that or kind of creating those they're very simple. When you're building your agent or you're designing it, you'll find in the configure option there is an opportunity for you to declare up to 6 starter prompts. However, if you are building a custom agent, a standalone agent, you will not have the starter prompt functionality. So what do you do? And this is where I've got some good help for you. So you want to, of course, give them some conversation starters. And so the way I recommend doing that is by creating what I call a conversation start seeder. So you could either create a separate topic that it will seed or that will run off of the conversation start topic, or you can just seed the conversation start topic within the system with some helpful tips or with some helpful questions. And I'm going to show you 2 examples of how they can be done. One of those will be in a live demo format, and the other example, I have some screenshots in the interest of time. So the way I normally recommend is by using the quick replies capability that you can use to any message node in the Copilot Studio topics. And so what you want to do is go to the conversation start system topic, and over there you want to go to the create a new node there, and in that node, a message node, you would be able to add some quick replies, and those quick replies would be part of that first, if you will, the first thing that's displayed. So let's see an example of that in action, and then I'm going to show you the alternative method. So over here, I've got an agent that I build and I deploy on my website, onlycopilotfans.com, and we'll actually have a few great examples and resources that I'm going to refer to in my conversation here today. But this was an agent that I created for a deployment over there. And so you'll find if I go into the test area, there are some of these starter prompts. So this is what I built. And the way we built them is by going to, as I mentioned in the slide, go to topics, and you'll find if you go to the system topics, there will be one called conversation start. And in this conversation start topic, you'll find that by default, there is going to be one message. Now, I also like some variations. I don't always want the messages to be stale. So I've created more than one message variation that you can do as well, but from coming to add here and adding message variations. But what we specifically are talking about here is creating quick replies. And you can also do that by going to add, and you can hit on quick reply. And once you've added one, then you can just keep adding more and more. So what I've done here to make it easy, I know I'm working with a limited amount of real estate. Unlike those standard starter prompts, which will display in the middle of the page, and there'll be plenty of space for us to, let's go back in here. There'll be plenty of space to kind of display all of them up here. In the a standard chat experience that you get with Teams or with kind of a web deployed agent, you won't have all that space. So we want to be judicious with the space that we have. So what we are going to do as an example here, look at what I've created. There's going to be an opportunity for you to say a text, which is the full text, and a title, which is the shorter title. So the title gets displayed in the bubble, and when somebody clicks it, it is going to then actually come back and say, hey, what is the text associated? I'm new to AI tools and prompts and so on, and it will answer that. So this is a particular one. I'm prompting best practices was a button, and the text is I'm new to AI tools. Can you teach me how, some best practices when it comes to prompting? And then it will go and get that information. So this type of an experience will get the user started. We'll give them an example of what to experience or what to expect when they're using your agent. So that's the first way of doing it. An alternative way of doing it is some people I know don't always want to make any changes or don't want to make many changes to a standard or a system topic. And if that is the case, let's go ahead and leave without saving. If you wanted to leave those as it were, you would simply have to make one little change. Go back into the conversation start topic and just add one node here, which takes them to a different topic. And once they go to a different topic, I've got a couple of screenshots here on what we would do. So the alternative is make another topic, and in that topic, you can create multiple choice questions. You could also create a closed list custom entity. Keep in mind, if you're using generative AI orchestration, the closed list entity, I believe, does not work or certainly does not work well. And each of those options that you have, those multiple choice, could in turn either just refer to something that's a generative a knowledge source, or it could also refer to a specific topic. So you can kind of focus and push these responses over there. So I've actually taken a few screenshots of the alternative way of doing it too. So here you can see from the trigger on conversation start, there was a message actually even here too. It redirected. I forgot what the screenshot looked like for a second. So we just added one little redirect to a topic that we created called seed questions topic. And this topic in turn had, on questions that it would ask, each of these were multiple choice questions. So each question would then lead to a specific topic or to a specific action or to a specific knowledge source. And as most of you know, you can also force a topic to use generative answers and have those generative answers specifically look at specific knowledge sources. So those are all things that you can do if you want to flow the conversation or orchestrate the conversation a certain way. This is by far, I think, going to create a much better user experience for your users when they first get started. Oftentimes, I know when I'm using an agent or when I'm on the user side, I struggle to know what are the things it's capable of. And I tend to then want to bypass that and talk to a human all the time. If your users are familiar with the capabilities of this agent and that can answer all those things, I think they would probably give your agent more of a chance, and there would be more utilization and more activation of your agent. So that is best practice number one. Let's go to best practice number two. Train your agents. Now, I've created a much larger article here because the general consensus with Copilot Studio is you cannot train your model. If anyone in the audience here has worked with or created agents through the Azure AI service or the Azure OpenAI service or now Azure AI Foundry, you know that once you've picked your model, you get to fine tune your model, you get to do all kinds of great things, you get to set the temperature and a lot of other things that will drive or change or fine tune the way your agent responds. But not so much in Copilot Studio. So in Copilot Studio, what do? You have the ability to give instructions if you're using generative AI orchestration. We'll talk about those again a little bit later. I think that's tip number 4 and some thoughts there. But by and large, you are simply creating topics and knowledge sources or that you're going to point it to, and then you're at the mercy of the Copilot Studio to determine or to work the way it does. And so often you'll find if you have multiple web knowledge sources or multiple documents that either both answer the information, but one does it in greater detail and one doesn't, you can't prioritize which knowledge source it looks at. And you might find that it may answer from the knowledge source which does not have as much information, or it's not always giving the best information. I've had situations where on a website, I did not actually, it was giving me some wrong information, even though I know it's there. Perhaps it's the way it was formatted. There was some ambiguity there. And when those things happen, you can be left frustrated. So the short answer that most people think is you cannot train your agent. Well, I'm here to tell you there's ways you can train it. As a matter of fact, there is a full article that is present on onlycopilotfans.com. That tends to be one of our more popular articles anyways. So I believe this is right over here. Nope, this one, let's come down to, yep. So how to train or fine tune your Copilot Studio agent. It can be done. I'm going to show you a couple examples, and I'll come back to this article because there's a neat little trick in here that I have what I've done. So to get things started, even if you have provided the right knowledge sources and the right topics and it's not working, one way you can start off by doing is to direct generative answers to use specific knowledge sources. And when you're doing that, you're basically within the topic, you're saying if the question has found an answer, then you want it to go to this specific knowledge source. And I'll show you an example of that in a second here. But the other tip that kind of follows along is you can also create a fallback knowledge source. This is where the novelty is. I have seen this as one of those things that will significantly enhance it, but you've got to do a really good job of defining when and how this knowledge source is called. And my article touches on that. And then the other thing too is, in general, whenever you're using generative AI orchestration, you want to make sure that your topics have very strong descriptions, that your actions have very strong descriptions, because the orchestration engine relies on those descriptions to determine which knowledge source to call or which topic or which action to use. And absent that, you could have fantastic information, but it wouldn't really know to go and look at those. So I strongly recommend you work with good descriptions. Don't just leave those descriptions as the default ones. Go in, explain, describe some of the things that you might want to be able to do. And then if the situation is absolutely dire, then what you might want to do is turn off generative AI orchestration, go back to classic orchestration, and then force every single kind of conversation point to point to a topic based on those the keywords that you would have for the topic. The topic in turn then goes back to this first step of using generative answers with specific knowledge sources, and then you're going to be able to get to the exact questions that you're looking for. So with that, let's go into Copilot Studio once more. I'm going to bring that up on my screen here. So in Copilot Studio, what I'm talking about for anybody who's not familiar with using specific knowledge sources, let's go into topics here. Let's pick one of my topics that I have here, Copilot Licensing. This was one of the topics. This is, by the way, a live AI agent. I had to take it off just yesterday for a couple of days. And the reason for that is Microsoft's making a big change to licensing where they're going to charge very high numbers of messages for use of autonomous actions. So I was going to disable them, and we're going to republish them because this agent is available for free for everybody to use. I certainly don't want to rack up a huge bill on my end. Coming back to the topic in hand, so one of the ways we would train our agent to kind of specifically get information from a certain knowledge source. So over here, you can see there's some trigger phrases. In this particular agent, AI or generative AI orchestration is disabled. So with these phrases, then when I'm looking at some information, it's going to look just at this data source for generative answers. So I've said only come back and look at this one website. Don't look at any of these other documents. So now I'm basically forcing the behavior, and I'm telling the agent, do not consider anything else that may provide ambiguous information. And this is also where your fallback knowledge source can become important. Another thing that I've done that I talked about on the article here, coming back. So in this particular example, what we did is we also create a corrections file or my fallback knowledge source. So what is this? You can create a Word document or a PDF document. I use Word document because it's easy to keep updating it. And then we could basically define some very detailed instructions in this document or some detailed information on all the things that are incorrect. So this came from an example from my business's website where we were looking for who are the people who are part of the leadership of the company. And even though our website would show my name, my business partner's name, my sales director, and my practice director's name, it was actually kind of not coming up with correct information. So what I did, and I was trying to, I think, come up with the converse information. So I was trying to force it to answer differently. So here we said, refer to this information in this document for updates and corrections to errors and inaccuracies found in other knowledge sources. The leadership team at DSWI is not made up of these individuals. It is made up of Bob Jones and Tina Smith only. And when we created this knowledge source, we added this as one more knowledge source. And then in the instructions that we had also done for the description we had done for the knowledge source is we said this knowledge source addresses inaccuracy. So once more, we're expressing in the description what it is that this knowledge source does. And by describing this, when the questions were being asked in here, so this was another thing I found. On occasion, if that behavior alone is not sufficient, in instructions for your agent as well, we had something called one more instruction that says the knowledge source title corrections to errors and other knowledge sources .docx addresses inaccuracies. So by creating a few of these touch points, when we tested, you will see that it goes through and this now knowledge is in here. It goes through and looks for these, looks at the website. These are the individual it finds, but still in the chat information, it will actually give the answer I've told it to. So you can force it to correct. I've had to use this in some other places where I found licensing information and licensing guides can be ambiguous. It doesn't give the best information. So this fallback way is kind of teaching it on the go, and it can do wonders. Another thing that I've done with great success is adding some HTML formatting to outbound emails. You'll also find that on the onlycopilotfans.com website in my blog here. So if I go to HTML formatting, so I'd added in some of my agents, whenever we send outbound emails, I noticed that the outbound emails would be all bunched up. So you've now got a connection or an action built in. That action is sending an email, as it should, but this is the format that the email goes out in. Kind of all bunched up, doesn't really look very user-friendly. So instead of manually creating an HTML formatted email payload, we simply instructed Copilot Studio to format outbound emails in HTML for better readability. So you'll find in one of my agents here, grayed out a whole bunch of the other instructions so we can focus on the one. So when creating an email, always format in HTML. Simply by doing this, you will find that when it builds out these emails, this is a screenshot from the activity screen in Copilot Studio. Look over here. That was all we did, and now it can send an HTML formatted email. So these can also be really, these instructions can be a big help. There's yet another article on onlycopilotfans.com. I'm not going to kind of go there as well, but that shows how you can add signatures with the help of a simple instruction and some variables. So you could say, always sign outbound, always include a signature on outbound emails with best regards, and then kind of you can add either as a variable or a hard code. The variable can be the user's name, or you can add the kind of sender's information right over there in the signature. That could be another instruction in the instructions list. So instructions can go a really long way in helping you train your agent. So you will, and the next time somebody asks you and says, can you train your Copilot Studio agent? The answer should be yes. You might not find it on Microsoft Learn, but you will, as you've seen over here, you can tell them AJ showed me how to do it. So that's our second of 5 best practices. A lot of the stuff that I'd done, by the way, required that I enable the generative AI, the orchestration. You'll also now find that as an option on the overview screen of the of your Copilot agent, Copilot Studio agent. So you can find orchestration. You can either enable it from here, or you can go back to what I had on the screen here. Both of these basically do the same thing. Toggling them on or off from one of those will kind of off would put it to classic on the other screen, or vice versa. So it's the same thing. It's in 2 different places today. Oh, I think some of the stuff I already showed you. I forgot that I had screenshots since I do some live demos in this as well. So here again, I'm kind of taking a data source and specifically pointing it to some unique knowledge sources that are involved. The third thing is around entity extraction. So I want you to understand how Copilot Studio, or just kind of always keep in mind how Copilot Studio works when it's extracting entities from a user's response or user's prompt. So first of all, unless it is absolutely necessary, avoid using the entire user response entity whenever you're taking and doing something with a user's response, because your user's response could contain a wealth of information, but your agent may not necessarily know how to parse or how to do something with it. One place where you might want to do it is you take that entire response, but then you use a generative answer, and the generative answer could basically decide what it's going to do with it. But in general, we have always recommended that you work with pre-built entities when those exist, and your pre-built entities are pretty strong. You've got your name, your city, your weather, your kind of city, and a bunch of other types of entities that it can automatically understand and go from there. You can also build your custom entities, as you're aware. And if you're not, those custom entities, though, just can't be anything. They are either closed list, so you can predefine a list of values that would be part of that custom entity, or it could be an expression that could be a prefix or a suffix, like something to a knowledge base article, etc. So read up on those. Those work a lot better than these. All work a lot better than using the entire response. And a big reason why is if you have a user that it wants to do a lot of things at once, or wants to ask a complex question, you want to be able to answer that without asking them things they've already answered. So as an example, if you had a user that wanted to ask about the weather, and they said, what is the weather in Orlando? You don't want to go and say, what city do you live in? And that's precisely what can happen if it doesn't necessarily understand weather and Orlando as being 2 different things that the user is talking about, but they're related. The weather is what the user wants to know. The contextually related entity, that is a city entity, that is Orlando. So otherwise, it might recognize the keyword weather, take you to the weather topic, and then it doesn't understand Orlando, doesn't know what to do with it. And then it's going to say, what city do you live in? Now the user gets frustrated. And also remember, that can also run up your message consumption. Every time your agent responds back, it consumes at least one message. It consumes two if it's going to be based on a kind of generative AI answer, and so on and so forth. So you want to limit your consumption, especially if it's a public use agent where you're going to have many visitors all the time asking lots of questions. So keep that thing well. But if there is multi-entity extraction that is enabled, or you're smartly using pre-built entities, it would then understand from the user's response that you're talking about weather. That is one thing. City is Orlando. And if the user had even said, what is the weather in Orlando in imperial units, then it would also know that the user wants to hear back the weather in Fahrenheit. So that's one other question it wouldn't need to come back and ask. So one question would give it all the information it needs, and then it would skip the unneeded questions that are there. So as an example, once again, I'm going to take you back into first my web browser here. And let's go into this topic, multi-entity extractions. This is also one of the most popular topics. You see up here as the text as popular posts. We get a lot of search hits on these. And so this particular example, I went into some great detail in 5 different scenarios on kind of multi-entity extraction and how it works or doesn't work based on what you have or have not done. But the specific example that we were talking about, right? So the user comes in here and chat says, tell me the temperature. What is your name? Is a question that's getting asked. And the person says, I'm Tina and I live in Brussels. Now, done correctly, it will understand, says, hi, Tina, I'll check on the weather in Brussels and get back to you, and it'll come back and get the information, because what it's doing is it has what the entities that are being used are identify as person's name. So in the first question, they did that. The user now added one more piece of information, and it knows the follow-up question is going to be identified by another pre-built entity, which is city. So because it got a city value, one of the options that we've got set up in here is skip the second question. And so when you're setting this up, I didn't have that in my screenshot. You could go into properties associated with this question, and it can be to skip unneeded or skip it if it's not required. So that's the experience you would get if you're using the proper or pre-built entities or custom entities. But, oh, by the way, I also have a screenshot of that. So allow question to be skipped if the user has already answered or if the variable already has a value. But here is where it can get really interesting. If you did not use a pre-built entity, and if you had actually used the user's entire response, it would think the entire response, I am Tina and I live in Brussels, was the user's name. So if at some point you actually wanted to use that user's name in a variable and part of the conversation, you would say, hey, Tina, it would actually be, hey, I'm Tina and I live in Brussels. What else can I help you with today? And so that could be problematic in so many ways. So not only does it ask the person once again what the city is, but it actually incorrectly understands that the entire variable's value should be this, and then hilarity ensues. So I've basically got a lot of different scenarios, 5 different ones where, depending on if the first value, if you have something that has 2 things that need to be answered, if the first one is a pre-built entity, but the second one is user's entire response, if both of them are user entire response and so on, how it does or does not work, it answers all of these. So I use them a lot in my workshops that I do for Copilot Studio, but I've kind of brought it out over here for you to see as well. So I encourage you to come and check this out. This is one more way you can make your agent very smart and kind of work with fewer messages. So going back into our 4th, saves time and money and message capacity. So, and then the 4th one is pay attention to descriptions and instructions. Now, you've already seen in my train the agent slide how we've used or leveraged instructions to great benefit. But descriptions as well are absolutely critical when you're using generative AI orchestration. Topic orchestration is driven entirely by entirely by descriptions and not by trigger phrases. So right now, as an example, when I have, let's go back into here and into Copilot Studio, this particular agent is using my classic orchestration. So generative AI, you can see it's using classic orchestration, and therefore the topics that I have are going to require trigger phrases. So I would give it about 4 to 5 trigger phrases, or 5 to 10 actually, I think is what the documentation recommends. And then based on those variations, it can figure out. And one thing too to note here, that if you have more than one topic with very similar phrases, then it relies on another system topic, which I'll show you in a second. So here, M365 Copilot Licensing has some trigger phrases. To the trained eye, you will be able to easily discern this and this because they're specifically referring to Copilot Studio. But to the untrained eye, or even to the bot, at times, these could seem very similar. So if there are questions where there's some ambiguity, then there is a system topic that it falls back on called multiple topics matched. And multiple topics matched will then decide which of these topics it should actually follow and kind of where it should go with those to help verify the intent of the user. If you have generative AI enabled or generative AI orchestration enabled, I believe in this environment I have at least one other agent here. Let's maybe go to this one. And if I go into settings, yep, this has generative AI orchestration. So if I were to pick a random topic or to create another topic here, I believe, let's just go to custom and see if I'd built any specific topics here. I'd built a date and time topic. And so in this particular one, you notice here, there is no trigger phrases. Instead, there is a describe what the topic does. Now, your topic description does not need to be very long, but what it does need to be is clear. So it can be clear and precise. It does not have to be concise. Make sure it explains when the topic is used. By what you describe here, the generative AI orchestration will determine if this is the right topic to pick. Also know that this generative AI orchestration experience forgoes the multiple topics matched topic. So if there is ambiguity, it is going to decide on its own which one it's going to call. If there's multiple topics or even multiple actions, actions also have description. So it's not just topics that will have a description, but let's just pick, I'm not really going to fully create an action, but if I were to go through over here, these descriptions are also going to work just as well. As a matter of fact, with generative AI orchestration, one of the benefits is that you do not have to have a topic. You can straight away go to an action, and that action gets called. And this particular description sometimes does just well, the default one. At times, you may actually want to invest in writing a much better description. And the better the description is, and the better the description, not just for the entire topic or for the entire action, but also for the inputs, the better experience you're going to get, especially in the actions world. By defining or using the correct descriptions for inputs, you will not need to manually map what needs to go into these fields from a user variable. So you do not need to do variable mapping to each of these inputs. The generative AI orchestration layer will itself collect the information that's needed from the user or whatever information the user has provided. It's going to apply that over here to those action inputs, and it's going to be able to carry out the action. So to help your agent work better, to help it make it smarter, best practice is that you do a good job of descriptions. Don't just rely on the default descriptions. Sometimes it will work just fine, but there are times it won't. And once again, to recap what I said before, the multiple matched topic is not used in generative AI orchestration. So your descriptions are going to be absolutely critical to help the AI layer determine which topic it's going to call or which action it's going to call. Yeah. So that is important. And so as I've already showed here, I think I kind of spoke more than showing all the slides. So over here, critical for understanding proper selection of knowledge sources and actions. And it intelligently orchestrates a conversation between my topics, my knowledge sources, actions, and even triggers. By the way, a quick note on actions and triggers. If your action or topic calls a Power Automate flow, or you have a trigger that calls, kind of which when you're building triggers, if you've tried them already, you've probably noticed it really is creating a trigger inside of Power Automate. But if you manually create them in Power Automate, they are not usable in Copilot Studio. You have to create them from Copilot Studio because it gives it certain information about the environment or kind of the solution that you will not be able to backfill. You don't have that information. So just a little food for thought. Not really related to this slide, but while I was on the topic of triggers, I thought I'd mention it. If you have questions about what I just said and you want to have a discussion around it, reach out to me on LinkedIn afterwards, and I'd be happy to explain that. So with that, let's go to, how are we doing on time? We're doing good. So let's go to, over here, I even had a screenshot. Sorry, I sometimes forget the screenshots that are there. I'm very driven by live demos, but if there's a technology issue, I always like to have some screenshots to work and to show you. So in the screenshot here, I actually took this one from Ignite. This is not an agent that I built. So if anybody from Microsoft looks and says, hey, that looks very familiar, it is. It's from one of the keynotes or follow-up presentations from Ignite where we're debuting the trigger capability. So notice over here, the descriptions and the instructions are far more detailed. If you're using the experience of creating an agent in Copilot Studio, so let's come back to my web browser. Let's say you are on Create and you're going to build a brand new agent. In the past, if I'm being very honest, just 6-7 months ago, not even that long ago, there'd be times in a workshop, I would hurry through the experience, really not worry about answering these questions. I'd go to skip to configure. And once I came here, I would give a hasty description. And later when instructions became available, I'd give some hasty instructions as well. I have now foregone that behavior in favor of doing the following through and answering some questions, because when I do, it becomes so much better and it creates pretty good instructions. So here I could say I'm creating an HR agent for my team, and it will ask me follow-up questions. And really every answer that I give starts creating more instructions that it's going to be able to put in there. Be sure that you use these instructions well. You could always come back and edit them. These instructions and descriptions, especially in the instructions part, I didn't talk about it in the train your agent, but if you want your agent to give detailed answers or short answers, if you want your agent to explain something like you're talking to a 6th grader or you're like talking to an adult, if you want your agent to have formal language or casual language, all of those things I think can be controlled, can be controlled by the instructions that you provided. So use this, don't skip it. You'll find a lot of value when you're using it. So without further ado, let's jump into number 5. Now, number 5 can be a collection of different things, but most important, the way I wanted to summarize this is to organize your content. And you would think this is a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised at how often when I'm trying to do a proof of concept with somebody for an agent, they may have their information somewhere on SharePoint or in OneDrive, but it's not always organized. So even if it's on SharePoint, for instance, perhaps you have an area where you keep all your HR benefits information. Now, that folder or that area directory could have information from this year, and then maybe in another folder information from another year, another year, another year. If I'm lucky, I have those in directories. If I'm unlucky, that information is just scattered all over the place. Maybe it's just the file names that are going to say what year it's for. So if a user is asking information from there, if you're creating a SharePoint agent, which you now know you could do if you have a Copilot for M365 license, you'll find that by pointing to a folder, you are essentially asking it to look at everything in the folder. It may look at things that are irrelevant. And if they're irrelevant documents, what happens? You're getting irrelevant answers. So when RAG comes into play, it looks at RAG patterns, it's going to say everything here must be just as important and just as valuable, and it will just look for wherever it gets the best answer. If you don't want it to look at certain documents, then of course you want to do a better job of organizing that content, right? So kind of starting off over here, make sure that you remove old and irrelevant and incorrect documents. This is all the more important when you're working with data within SharePoint. So in some cases, you may even want to create a separate folder structure for anything that's outdated, archived, and keep them all separately, so that when you're relating to and you're pointing to a document, you're specific, or a folder, you're only pointing to the folder that contains the current and most up-to-date information. Of course, make sure that that folder does not contain anything confidential, right? So if it's there, it's going to be looked at. If you are using, when you're building your agent, if this is an action that's going to be looking at some of this, you get to choose if the user's credentials are going to be utilized or if the maker's credentials are going to be utilized. So if for some reason you have to use the maker credentials, then beware, whatever the maker can see, everybody can see. Of course, it's a good practice if you're deploying this agent for use within your organization and you have Azure Active Directory or Entra ID authentication, then you probably would do well to use the user authentication. And if you're not sure where or how that is set, as an example, if you're in an action, let's see if I can bring that up here really quickly. Let's see if I could go into, let's cancel this action creation. Cancel, let's leave this. Let's go to an agent here. I have an action here that's been disabled, but I may still be able to go in and look at some information related to it. So let's go to an edit. The authentication method here, end user authentication, is the user or the Copilot author authentication. So you get to determine or pick those. If you have authentication turned off because it's a public deployment on a website, perhaps you do not require authentication. Then anything that any action that requires authentication will, of course, require the maker's authentication or the Copilot author's authentication method. So be sure that your information is well organized and so on and so forth. Now, if you do have very large files as knowledge source, this is, again, one of those things I've learned by trial and error. There is no particular documentation, but my personal experience, and I think most people who have tried this have found this to be true as well. If you're working with very large files, you are probably going to get poorer outcomes, and the ability for it to answer questions can actually be very poor. So what is that threshold? I can't tell you a specific number. I'm thinking this gets better over time, but there was a time when I had found online some third-party resources that stated anything over 80 pages, for instance, could be poorly indexed. So what you might want to do is break your document into smaller bite sizes, smaller sizes for it to be able to do more with it. So as an example, you could look at if you have a 15-chapter guidebook that is being used to answer questions about a topic, you could look to make it chapter by chapter. So the book has 15 chapters. You have 15 PDFs that you upload and you use over there. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind as well over here. That because this does not apply to everybody, I didn't have this as a particular kind of bullet point. But going back into my Copilot experience or agent experience, if I have at least one Copilot for M365 paid license, I will be able to leverage the enhanced search results capability. What is this? This basically means that you would be able to leverage the semantically indexed information that's inside of your SharePoint that is being used for SharePoint documents or for graph data. And this could be very valuable because this basically allows you to use data that has been better vectorized and semantically indexed. You're going to get better quality results. Now, you could, of course, turn it off as well if it's slowing down your answering capability or so on. But just turning this on won't work if you don't have at least one Copilot for M365 license. And anytime you're uploading your files to a knowledge source, it will actually put them into Dataverse, and it will index these files as well. So which is why you'll notice whenever you put a file up there, it takes a little bit of time for it to understand or for the file to become usable. Somebody asked me this on LinkedIn the other day. Why do websites, kind of get added really quickly and not documents? Well, the reason is that with websites, it is basically running the equivalent of a custom Bing search, where it's basically running a Bing search only within that particular resource. So only Copilot.fans, it will search anything in only Copilotfans.com. If I had said www. It would not look at xyz.onlycopilotfans.com. It'll only look over there. So as long as Bing has indexed all of this, it is going to be able to find information in it. If the website itself has not been indexed, it won't. If the website it refuses to have its pages indexed or refuses to have those pages be searched, you won't find any information. A good example, I was looking at Encyclopedia Britannica, which is for kids, which is a public resource. I was building an agent for my 11-year-old for a 6th grader, and we were trying to have information from public sources. We didn't want it to search information from its general knowledge. We wanted to control the flow of information, so only look at what the school considers as authorized resources. And so we looked at Duckster, I think was a resource that does allow the agent to search. Britannica, which is not web, which is not closed off or gated off, but when you search for an article, it basically refuses to answer because Bing is not allowed to index information within that. And so, excuse me, I feel like I'm about to sneeze right here. But so anyways, semantically indexed documents perform well when you're using documents of certain types, know why websites do or don't work, understand all of that. I think those can be better. And if you're using files, break them down into smaller bite-sized files and give them proper descriptions. And you're going to find a lot of value, or you're going to find better performance, if you will. And finally, this is I think this has continued, the actions experience has continued to improve over a period of time. But I found that if at times Microsoft does have an action for something, you may still want to create your own flow to perform the same exact thing. Because what I found is that certain pre-created actions, especially, for instance, the Gmail ones, I struggle with because I don't always have all the information and it doesn't give me the kind of guidance that I get when I'm creating it as a flow. With Business Central, I was having this issue as well. So consider, instead of using the built-in action, go to Microsoft Flow. So what I'm talking about here is if I were to go to actions, and if I were to build something for Gmail, now this action up here will give me certain inputs and certain outputs, but it doesn't always explain everything nearly as well. Sometimes it forces me to populate a value, or assumes I have to populate a value. And I've seen that in Microsoft Power Automate, when I create a custom flow with not the new experience, with the older experience, some of these things work a lot better. I, as a maker, am able to overcome some of the challenges that happen. I wish I'd come up with a better example for today. Just I'm drawing a blank, but trust me, if you've been there long enough, if you are getting frustrated with an action in here, just take my word, try out, go to Microsoft Power Automate, try to custom build that action, even if you have to use the same connector. These are Power Platform connectors. Use the same get email detail connector, but in Power Automate, and use the old designer experience, you might be able to overcome some of the obstacles and challenges. So with that, with about 13 minutes to spare, I believe I am down to my final thank you slide. So let's see if we can't get there. Let's see, was there anything else? No. So if you have any questions, find me by LinkedIn. That's usually the best way to go. I do have my email address here at DSWI, my day job. Or you can, of course, check out onlycopilotfans.com for some helpful tips and answers. I also do put up a lot of the same information up on LinkedIn, or point out every time I have a new article. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll be always up to date on the latest articles. So with that, let me turn my attention to the browser here. Give me a second. Let's drag this up over here so I can privately open up any questions that may have come in. Oh, there seem to be a few. So there is one from a user named QWERT or QWERT2744. Is there a way for the seed to show up when the user clicks it? It just sends it to the user chat location and not actually execute it. Essentially, same function that M365 agents have. Yeah, so it doesn't actually pre-execute. Oh, I see what you're saying now. I know exactly what you're talking about. So for anybody else who doesn't know what we're saying here, let's give this an example, or let's give this a whirl. So here, if I say stand out on socials, I click the starter prompt, it puts this here, but doesn't execute it. So I can then add information to it and I can run it. And then in the experience that I showed, it just automatically ran it. So no, the answer, I do not have a way today, or I actually hadn't even thought of trying to find a way to not make it execute that prompt. So in the experience that you've seen in my examples, let's also bring that back in for anybody who didn't catch it the first time. So if I'm in test, I click here and it would just execute that. I'm going to give it a try. Today, I haven't found a way. I frankly didn't think about it. So yeah. The other thing I'm not able to do today is for it to come back and show me that experience again and again. I have to, unless I restart the chat here, or in certain experiences, in kind of Copilot declarative agent experiences, when we restart the chat, it will show the starter prompts. But yeah, this is kind of making the most of a bad situation. I believe, I do not have it on good authority, but I do believe at some point Microsoft's going to rectify this so that any agent will be able to have some sort of a starter prompt. So I believe this is more of a makeshift experience for something we don't have today. One of the release notes I'd seen earlier for Wave 1, for Wave 2, it actually made me think that we are going to get that experience across the board. But then it turned out that experience was only available for declarative agents. So the example I'd given over here with the trade law Copilot, where we had built, our own thing here. This was actually a proof of concept that I'd done for an international trade attorney. So this was a fun experience as well. So let's go into the next question here. This comes from Alex Chandler. How can we deploy a bot created in Copilot Studio to the Copilot 365 chat as an agent? This is actually quite simple. So there's two ways you can go about it. If you're already in this experience and the user wants to create a personal agent, they go through the create an agent experience. They describe the agent, and then they can configure that agent, and then this gets deployed over here. So these are declarative agents that are personal in nature. If you're creating it from Copilot Studio, you can have more freedom and flexibility, and you can deploy this as a solution. So how do you do that? So when you're coming here and you're creating an agent, don't create one from scratch. Go to look at agents, go and pick out Copilot from Microsoft 365. And from here, you're going to add an agent. So when you add an agent from here, now this agent is always going to be deployed back into your Copilot for Microsoft 365. You're going to be able to see and kind of manage this from here as well. Let me see if I have an example in this environment. If not, I know in another environment I do have it. Cancel, leave. Oh, the trade law Copilot agent is actually something I built in Copilot Studio. So after I had built it and deployed it, I can come back over here and I can look at this and I can manage this from inside of Copilot Studio. So I've got all the capabilities that I do over here, including my starter prompts. You can see that I've got this published already in Copilot and in Teams. And when we were looking at availability options here, we actually published this as a solution and properly published. So I'm going to pull up Teams inside of a web browser so that I don't lose any connectivity here. Let's give it a quick second. Oops, sorry, I'm the wrong organization. Let's come out of, did not mean to be in the Microsoft MVP organization. Let's go specifically to this particular business unit. In the meantime, I'm actually just going to try to load this somewhere else as well, because this is taking a second here. So I've got another Teams environment here that I'm just going to bring up. This should make my presentation a little early. So I've got some of these deployed both in Copilot for M365, or these two are also deployed in Teams, and my users are able to access them from inside of Teams. They can self-deploy them over here, built for your org type of experiences. They would also be able to do the same if they wanted to find that experience inside of Copilot for M365 work. They could go into Get Agents, and they would be able to find built for your org experiences here. To do this, when you've got into Copilot Studio and you've built an agent like this, and you want to publish, first go into Channels. Let's go back in here to availability options, and then you could say, you could choose how you wanted to deploy this. Losing my train of thought here for a second. This is already a declarative agent, so I don't have to do anything else to get it to be available everywhere. When I publish, it gives me, do I want to do Teams, or if I want to do M365 Copilot only, and then it automatically makes it available for both. Where I was going with my other example is that if you have not built it for Copilot for M365, but you do want it available as a solution when you are publishing your agent, let's just go up here. It won't be possible with this one. This does not require authentication, but here I could specifically say I'm deploying this for Teams, and when I publish it, I can request that this is made available for everybody, and I could request that this is available as a global app. Then your Teams administrator is going to have to go and approve this, and once approved, it's going to show up in my larger library, as you were seeing before, kind of built for your org type of agents. So you will see things up here that show up with this little Copilot icon. This was built as a declarative agent from inside of Copilot Studio by going to Agents Copilot for M365, and it was built and published from there. Things that do not have the Copilot icon but are still available as built for your org, they were built as standalone agents. That standalone agent was published for Teams, but also then sent for approval to the Teams administrator, so the Teams administrator can approve that, and then it shows for built for your org. So I hope that explains it. There's actually an Only Copilot Fans blog article that's going to be coming up about that very soon. Let's go to the next one, LB3HD, 80 pages. What's that in character count? So that's anecdotal. There's absolutely no documentation, so I can't give you a hard count. And it could be 75 pages or it could be 95 pages. But what we have found is when you are taking a very large document that spans a lot of pages or a large file size, that the performance with RAG tends to be poorer. We've found, just in the same anecdotal example, we've actually found that ChatGPT, for instance, if you're building a custom agent there, that does much better when you point to a knowledge source that is larger than, say, kind of Copilot Studio does. So we have found better success, one, with documents that you're putting broken down into smaller file sizes. Two, if you have Copilot for M365 and you have enhanced search results, putting them into search SharePoint, because they were then better indexed. However, anytime you put something into SharePoint, understand that you're going to have to wait a lot longer based on file size. You will find, this is not just from my personal experience. I was in a session from another MVP at Community Summit last fall, and he was saying it could take up to 12 hours at times for documents to get indexed, sometimes longer. So SharePoint documents, while once indexed, will perform better. To index a newly uploaded document to SharePoint can take quite some time. We're down to 3 minutes. Let's see where it says allow. This is from Quirt 2744. What does the allow AI to use own general knowledge do? What are there any risks with having this toggled on with confidential information? So this actually does not look at your confidential information at all. For anybody who doesn't know where this question is coming from, let's go back into my screen over here. This is where, by the way, this information is only for standalone agents usually. So let's go over here, and there's going to be a toggle in the overview area, knowledge. This is going to allow it to reference the general learnings that it has from being part of a large language model. So large language models are trained on a certain, large piece of information, information on historical events, information on just generic stuff. And with GPT-4o, which is a model that powers Copilot Studio, it's trained through October 2023. As an example, this general knowledge can be used to answer questions about how to build how to make an origami duck, right? Or how to make your favorite recipe. But at times, it will also know information about technology. Where it becomes risky with technology is that it will only know information through October 2023. And unlike a ChatGPT or a Copilot experience where you could ask it to then search the internet for more recent information, you can't do that here. So what are the pros and cons? I'll give you a very quick pro and a very quick con. Let me start with the con. A con is that if it also has information that you are otherwise answering with general knowledge, while it will look at, while you're also answering with your own knowledge, you could have a situation where for some reason, if your description for the knowledge source is not clear, it may think you haven't answered it, then it goes into general knowledge and answers that question, but it forgoes your information. That is a con. A pro is you can then have a bot that is generally smart. And what I mean by that is I can disable the hello and hi type of topics, and I can have a human-like conversation. With general knowledge enabled, my natural language conversation experience is much richer. You can have it. My 11-year-old once again wanted to build her agent that talked like a Valley girl with a lot of emojis and Gen Alpha lingo. That only works if you have general knowledge enabled, because those are general knowledge skills that it has. So one more question here, and then we'll hang up. We'll kind of wrap up. This is from LBH3D. When Copilot agents are added to BizChat, are the share permissions retained? So share permissions, I think you're talking about anything for documents that are coming from your Entra ID or from your Microsoft 365 tenant. That's a very good question. Remember that when you are building these agents and you are creating an action, or you're creating any kind of a connection that requires authentication, you have to decide if it's the user's or the maker's authentication. And depending on what's been answered there, that's what it is going to use. So if it's a SharePoint resource, then of course that user's SharePoint permissions are going to be paramount. So if the user does not have access to that SharePoint document, even if that SharePoint document is part of a knowledge source, is part of information, they're not going to be able to access it. So that information is respected. Now, if that information is coming from some other external source with some other external authentication, and you're using maker authentication, then of course it's not going to come into consideration. But inside of your M365 tenant, you can fully expect compliance with your permissions, with your share instructions, or whatever data governance, data security policies you have in place. Just know that the maker has to be sure that they're not building actions that utilize maker permissions as opposed to user permissions. Once again, for anybody who doesn't remember what I'm talking about, we have this right over here. This is just from actions, but there are other places. So, shared with a group of users versus the entire org. Well, again, if the user does not have if it's not been shared with the user, they're not going to be able to see it, period. But if I'm missing a nuance here, let's take that conversation offline. But in broad strokes, it will respect whatever permissions have been set. So as long as you're using a Microsoft Entra ID user and there's permissions that are assigned to, or things that have been shared with or not shared with this user, it should consider that. If you're using a specific link, if that's what you're talking about, then let's take this offline. You should not be using share links to point to a SharePoint resource in Copilot Studio. You should be directly pointing to, when you use a knowledge source, a SharePoint thing over here, and you should make a connection that way, not custom created links that you have from another area. So, but LBH3D, if you have a follow-up conversation or have more questions over there, please reach out. I think we're 2 minutes past the top of the hour. Thank you for the engaging questions. I love it when these questions come in. Like, follow, subscribe, all those fun things. I hope to hear from you again soon. See you at another conference or an event. I'll be at quite a few this year. I'm going to be at AI Copilot Summit in San Diego this March. I'm going to be at the Global AI Boot Camp across a couple of different events. I was at Bremen, and I'm hosting one in Houston March 21st. I'll be at Directions North America, Dynamics Minds, Dynamics Con Live, and a few more before the summer is over. So talk to you soon. See you soon. Ski, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, AJ. Thanks for a fabulous session. And we'd like to thank everyone for joining and for the excellent questions. As always, we appreciate your feedback. So if you would like to comment on the session or have any suggestions for future sessions, feel free to go ahead and use that reactor survey. The main thing that you'll want to use to note this is the event code, which is 24620. Once again, that is 64620. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.